Good morning, guys. Today we're going to look at another online lecture. This one's going to be on the Louisiana Purchase. It should be a little bit shorter than normal, but hopefully it still goes as smooth and we can take away as much critical content and knowledge as we can from this presentation so we can use it to finish some of our assignments this week. So let's just dive right into it. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803. Now, before we can kind of get to the actual purchase, we got to kind of set the stage. So setting the scene. So the whole idea of the purchase was we wanted to make sure that we could get the port of New Orleans. The port of New Orleans was of the utmost importance to the United States. Obviously, if you have the port, you can send stuff out of the port, you can get stuff into the port. So it was more economically speaking than anything. So, but here's the whole story of the port. So in 1795, Spain actually controlled the port of New Orleans and the entirety of the Louisiana Territory. All right, which leads to President Washington, kind of backtracking a little bit here. He sends a guy named Thomas Pinckney to try to basically keep the port open for trade. So Pinckney goes to Spain, and Washington's deal with Spain was to allow Americans to use the Mississippi River as a route to transport goods to New Orleans. So again, we are going to use the Mississippi River to send our goods out of the port of New Orleans right there in the Gulf. All right, so to make matters a little bit difficult, in 1800, Spain ends up signing treaty with France, giving the Louisiana Purchase territory back to France, okay, which leads us to this. The United States buys the Louisiana Purchase. President Thomas Jefferson sent two guys, Robert Livingston and James Monroe, to France to purchase the port of New Orleans. All right, so again, the goal is to buy New Orleans, the city, so we can have the port, and a little add-on is West Florida, and the price range that Jefferson gave these two guys was less than $10 million. That was the game plan going into the discussions. Buy New Orleans, so we can have the port of New Orleans, and buy some land west of Florida, and the price range is less than $2 million. So that's the goal. All right, but when they got to the meeting, these two guys, Robert Livingston and James Monroe, got a very special offer. All right, so while negotiating, some things came up. All right, here is what happens. Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon, the guy we know from France, he was actually just got done fighting the coalition wars in Europe, and we know wars are expensive, so Napoleon needed money fast to first pay back the debts that he owed from previous wars, and also to finance his new war against the coalition. So the negotiator for the French side asked Livingston if the United States wanted to buy all of Louisiana. Okay, if we wanted to buy the entire Louisiana territory, not just the city of New Orleans. And when I'm talking about Louisiana, I'm not talking about just the state today. I'm talking about the Louisiana territory that basically stretched from Louisiana all the way to Oregon. Okay, basically the whole half of the Midwest, the western half of the Midwest, and everything from that point on. Basically everything left or west of St. Louis, to kind of put that in perspective. Okay, so they agreed to pay the French $15 million for the entirety of the Louisiana territory. So if we look here, again, the original goal was to pay $10 million to get just this port right down here, but for $5 million more, we get all of this, and eventually we'll see that expand even more west. Okay, but for right now, we paid $5 million more to get basically everything in the yellow here. Okay, so a pretty good deal for the United States. All right, the purchase basically doubled the size of the United States. So for $5 million extra, we get that much more land. Okay, so now the United States is going to go from becoming kind of a smaller nation into a massive nation, which we know it as today. All right, so the question is it constitutional, though? Can the president actually make this purchase? Is it within his powers to do so? All right, so President Jefferson hauled the news from France, but was unsure if the purchase went against the Constitution. Again, the new law of the land, the Constitution. So let's kind of take a look. Constitution said nothing about president having the power to buy land. So Jefferson kind of figured he could make a precedent here. Okay, there's nothing in the Constitution about it. so I can kind of pull a George Washington, and whatever I do, that's what the law is going to be, or what kind of the rules going to be for future presidents. All right, so he reasoned that the Constitution allowed the president to make treaties as long as the Senate approved the treaty. All right, so he kind of figured it would be something along those lines. So in 1803, the Senate approves the treaty, and the Louisiana Purchase deal is done. All right, so the significance of this. Now, we got the purchase, but we really didn't know anything about the land. All right, so what Jefferson does is he sends these two guys that we know in history to go explore and basically record everything that we need to know about from this territory. So he asked a guy named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to head on an expedition through the Louisiana Purchase territory. They have 3 goals that they're trying to accomplish while they're out and about on this expedition, I guess. Goal 1, map a route to the Pacific. Okay, people believe that there is a direct route via river, stream, whatever, but most people believe that there is actually a route that takes you from across the United States, basically. Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2 is investigate Native American tribes and trading patterns. Okay, and then number 3 is establish relations with Native Americans. Okay, obviously Native Americans live in the territory. The United States and Native Americans don't really have good history. We're going to continue to have terrible history moving forward from this point. But Jefferson knows that we're going to have to make contact with them and obviously trade and kind of work together to make sure that the Louisiana Purchase territory can actually be used by the U.S. government. Because if the Native Americans do not like the U.S. government, every time the government is in their territory, obviously conflicts are going to arise. All right, so the significance of this is the exploration gave Americans information about Western lands, basically laying the foundation for westward expansion. Okay, this is kind of the first time in United States history that we're going to start to kind of have in the back of our mind, well, eventually we're going to have to move west. What's out there? What's it look like? Okay, so it's kind of the beginning phases of westward expansion, and also kind of the beginning of the end for Native American populations who live out west. Because now it's kind of just only a matter of time before the United States government comes rolling in. All right. And for us, this is the last slide. You can kind of take a look at what the country looks like in 1803. Obviously, we have the normal United States right here in the shaded area. In the lighter tan, we have the Louisiana Purchase. And then everything to the west is Spanish territory. And we'll see basically the route that Lewis and Clark do right here. They go up into the Dakota Territory and over into Oregon. All right. Later on, we'll obviously see what happens with the Spanish territory in our coming weeks, and we'll get the story on how that land becomes a part of the United States as well. All right, but that's all I got, guys. That's kind of the Louisiana Purchase in a nutshell. We're going to go over there where we're talking with the French just to buy the port of New Orleans, and to do that, we have to own the city of New Orleans. So again, the goal was for Robert Livingston and James Monroe, go to France, buy the city of New Orleans for less than $10 million. The result, well, for $15 million, we get the whole Louisiana territory, which effectively doubles the United States. All right, and out of the purchase, we get the great expedition of Lewis and Clark, whose job is to go into the territory, record everything, basically become like the first eyes and ears of the U.S. government. Later this week, you guys will look at Lewis and Clark in a little more detail. I'll have some readings out there for you, some video clips on their expedition and kind of the importance that they had in kind of shaping westward expansion. But for now, guys, that's all I have. I will see you guys in the next one.